John Major Jenkins is with us. I've seen him in a number of documentaries, including one on the History Channel. He's written a lot of articles and books on the subject of 2012 and Mayan cosmology. He joins me tonight from Colorado. John, how are you?
I'm doing well, Alex. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad you can make it. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your website, and since I've had so many people on, I'm going to continue to have them on the subject of 2012, what you focus on most particularly in your research.
Well, I've been studying Maya cosmology and Maya culture for some 20 years, and I have a great interest in the Maya culture that survives in the highlands of Guatemala. So my research has really been focused on reconstructing the original authentic cosmology, and 2012, of course, presented itself to me pretty early in my research as a great enigma, the great cycle ending in the long count calendar. It's a true artifact of the calendrical tradition, and when I started to really look into this in the early 90s, scholars didn't really have much to say about it. And well, through the years, I kept doing the research and returning to the highlands of Guatemala. And what I discovered, in a nutshell, is that there is this very rare astronomical alignment that's happening in the years around 2012. We might think of a 36-year window. And it's not just some random assortment of planets in a certain sign or something. It actually has to do with the entire framework of the sky. And it's called a galactic alignment. It's referred to as a galactic alignment. It's a real thing. It's a real empirical thing. Astronomers have calculated it. It happens only once every 26,000 years. And from the vantage point of the Earth, we will be lining up with the center of the Milky Way galaxy, the center of our Milky Way. And this happens only once every 26,000 years. So when I sort of stumbled upon this information, and then I started to, wonder if it was truly connected into a real Mayan knowledge, and that is the reason why they picked 2012 to end their calendar cycle. It seemed to me like this was really, really big news.
It is interesting to take a look at this, and I am wondering, like a lot of people, how is this going to affect our lives here?
Well, that's really a two-part question. It's a very, very good question. The first part is that I was so intrigued with this that I wondered if the Maya had really intended their 2012 date to target this. And so I looked into the various Maya traditions, the creation mythology, the symbolism of the ball game, and I actually looked at the early Maya site called Izapa that invented the 2012 calendar. So this site was thriving some 2,000 years ago, and there's carved monuments at the site, and there's astronomical orientations of the carved monuments and so on. So that's how my research has proceeded, and in my books, Maya Cosmogenesis 2012 and Galactic Alignment, I did make a really good case for there being an encoded symbolism that sort of proves that the Maya did intend 2012 to target this galactic alignment. Now, part two is really interesting, too, because one wonders if there really is some empirical, scientific, energetic sort of basis to this galactic alignment. We're lining up with the plane of the Milky Way galaxy. And I've really encouraged scientists and astronomers to look at this, and I really do believe that it probably can form the basis of sort of a new model of consciousness and changes going on this planet. This is almost like a time that's very similar to the Copernican revolution in the late 1500s, early 1600s, when we went from a geocentric model to a heliocentric model. And it's very strange that the Maya, who thrived some 2,000 years ago at this site of Izapa and stumbled across this galactic cosmology, this galactic cosmovision, are the ones to present us with this model by which we can understand the incredible changes and crises that are going on in the world today.
So this building that we're looking at is an interesting piece of human ancient history. They set it up also to where when the sun shined through the top of it, that it would form this serpent-like spiral down the stairs. Each one of these stairs being, I believe, 365 of them to represent the days.
And you're looking at the Pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza?
Perhaps that is it.
Yeah, there's a pyramid at the site of Chichen Itza, and they were able to position that temple in such a way that there's a shadow that's cast by the sun, and it makes a serpent coming down the northern stairway.
Okay, so that's a different site. How many different sites then are we looking at in Mayan cosmology, Mayan history?
Oh, there's dozens and dozens of really important sites that are connected with astronomy, and it's really amazing. Archaeologists are discovering new sites every year, and there's probably a couple of hundred really significant sites. Gene Stewart, the archaeologist for National Geographic, he said in the 1970s that we probably have uncovered only 1% of what was there.
Interesting. Last week I talked briefly with Patrick Jarrell. HowToSurvive2012.com is his website, and he talked about a pole shift, a concept that I've been hearing about for, I'd say, a good 15 years since I've been looking in this kind of direction. So what is your stance on the whole topic of a pole shift?
Well, I really am suspicious of alarmist sort of interpretations of Mayan information, especially when it's connected directly into 2012 or Mayan prophecy. What I look at is the actual Maya documents, you might say, the primary documents of the Maya traditions. So we have like the Maya creation mythology, and it's a world age doctrine. So it talks about a series of world ages, and we are approaching the end of one of those world ages. But the information, the Mayan information in it, is that the end of a cycle is not about a final destruction. It's about transformation and renewal. That is basically the information that we have. But there's a crisis that humanity is going through. This is part of the prophecy, you might say. And it's a prophecy that provides general insights into what we might call the science of cycle dynamics. It's not so much a prophetic tradition that says an earthquake's going to happen or the poles are going to shift on this date or something like that. The general insight of the Maya prophecy is that at the end of the cycle, there's a deity in the creation myth. He's called Seven Macaw, and he exemplifies vain egoism. So this archetype will be seizing humanity, and it'll be controlling and deceiving humanity. And this is the prophecy for the years leading up to 2012. And certainly, I certainly wouldn't have to convince you that we look around us and we look at world leaders that are just deceiving and controlling humanity and trying to keep people stuck and limited and keep them unconscious.
I find it strange, John, on that topic, that the year 2012 is also a target date for a lot of different things that the military is working on, and also the years close to 2012, 2010, and the 2015 programs. And there's a lot of bizarre activity, as you know, I'm sure as well, the CIA is involved in, that world leaders are involved in, the Pentagon's involved in, and also other governments. What do you think they're getting ready for, and do you think that they know something perhaps about 2012 as well in this area, and thus they're making preparations?
Well, I really appreciate the information that you organize and present on your program. It's really a great service that you're doing, and I learn a lot just by tuning in. And my sort of suspicion with that is that perhaps 2012 is a footnote for them, not because of the galactic alignment necessarily, but because it threatens to be a rally cry for indigenous cultures around the world to reassert their self-determination. I mean, if we were to say anything about 2012, in terms of something that might happen in that year or towards the end of that year, because the end date falls on December 21st of 2012, the solstice. We might suspect that the Maya and other indigenous cultures that have been, suffering under the iron heel of Western capitalism for hundreds of years might rear up and try to take back some of their self-determination. So with all these things sort of, dancing around in the fragile, sort of structure of world economics as it stands today, I think that it's all about keeping the clamp on. They're trying to keep the clamp on so that people cannot become more conscious and take back their rights as human beings.
I think that's an interesting thing to think about, John. In terms of consciousness and consciousness raising and spirituality, I do see this increase in synchronicity in the universe, and people talking about subjects like 2012, there is a little bit of hope there, and through looking at Bruce Lipton's work, I think there's a lot of hope in that area as well for us to investigate how we can create our own reality. But it does get a little bit frightening when you do look at some of these reports, like the one that I mentioned earlier about the Russian scientists working on the mind control project that Homeland Security is interested in. I don't think now it's really a conspiracy theory anymore. People are actually discussing it as to whether or not there's a war on consciousness itself to suppress energies.
Interesting, yeah. Well, I think that we do create our own realities, and to boil it down to a simple decision, it's great to be informed about what's really going on, first of all, and that must be said. But we can't succumb to the fear-mongering tactics that are being tossed around, because we can succumb to fear and close up, but really what needs to happen so that we can create a good reality is to open up to the real possibilities. In other words, to open up and be guided by what we might call higher principles or a higher vision, of the future. So instead of being consumed with reacting in fear or combating all the crap that the controllers are trying to throw at us, somehow we need to transcend that and open up our minds to the highest possible future and then create that together.
Interesting. I've heard, John, that 2012 is going to change how we view time and space. How would you break that down or that claim?
I think that 2012 does represent a paradigm shift, and I'm not sure if it's going to be something new under the sun. It might be, what I really feel like it's going to be is it's going to be putting our ego-driven obsessions and institutions back into right relationship with what we might call a higher wisdom or a higher guiding force. So in that sense, it'll be a huge paradigm shift, but in a larger sense, it'll really be a return back to the perennial universal principles that have guided a lot of the ancient spiritual traditions even long ago.
How many different calendars do we have that talk about 2012? I've heard about the Mayans, but I've also heard about the Egyptians.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. My book, Maya Cosmogenesis 2012, came out almost 10 years ago, and that focused on reconstructing the Maya cosmology around 2012. And I asked that question then after that book came out, and my book, Galactic Alignment, was the answer to that question. I looked at other traditions like in Egypt and ancient India and Islamic astrology and other traditions like tarot symbolism, and it's not so much that we find calendars per se, but we do find sort of like a hidden layer or a deep, as yet unexplored layer in the history of Western traditions of this galactic alignment. It almost seems like this galactic alignment, which of course targets the years around 2012, was known to the oldest civilizations in Vedic India and in Egypt, and they believed that these kinds of alignments to the center of the galaxy stimulate transformation on the planet. Now, if we just sit with that alone, like for example, if we just, the calendar that gives us the 2012 end date was put in place 2,000 years ago, and they would have said that the time around 2012 would be a time of great transformation. And certainly look around us. I mean, just the last 30 years, spaceflight, computer technology, maybe they were right. Maybe the galactic alignment does somehow trigger amazing changes.
How did they exactly get the date December 21st, 2012 through the Gregorian calendar? If we know that the Gregorian calendar was created in 1582 or implemented in 1582, and a lot of calendars from tribes that were left over from the previous centuries were eradicated in their area through colonization, how did the translation actually take place?
Well, in their calendar, in their long count calendar, they would simply call it the end of the 13th Baktun. So we have many, many dated monuments in the long count calendar from the classic period. They're carved in stone. And scholars, beginning about 100 years ago, they were compiling all the long count dates. And they wanted to figure out how this calendar related to a calendar that we in the Western world could connect with or understand. So it basically became sort of an academic question of making a correlation between the Maya calendar and the Gregorian calendar. So then we would know when, say, Palenque thrived, if it was the 6th century AD or the 2nd century AD. It was really just sort of reconstructing how the calendar works, in the same way that we can go back to Egypt and we can figure out how the Egyptian calendar correlates to a time frame that we can relate to and understand. So with this work then, which stretched over many decades and included astronomical information and carbon-14 dating and so on, scholars figured out the correlation, which gives the end of the 13th Baktun falling on December 21st, 2012.
So you've done a lot of firsthand, of course, research into this. You talked about a lot of different theories when it comes to 2012, and I see a lot of ones that are just bizarre and far out, but you've actually gone down to the Mayan ruins. You've actually gone down to Central America and Mexico. How many times? 9 times?
Oh, 9 or 10 times, probably more, yeah.
Okay, so explain some of that to us. I'm sure that was interesting. You mentioned on another radio show that there are still some Mayan people living down in that region.
Oh, yeah, there's millions of pure-blood Maya living in the highlands of Guatemala, and they still follow the 260-day sacred calendar. But the long count calendar that gives us the 2012 date fell into disuse some 500 years ago or more. So my work has been an effort to reconstruct the fragmented pieces of this lost calendar tradition. And the reason why my work is so unique and pioneering is that I've gone right to the site that invented the 2012 calendar. It's a little site called Izapa, I-Z-A-P-A. It's a little-known site in southern Mexico, right by the Guatemala border. And there was some great archaeological work done on the site by Brigham Young University. But yeah, I've been to that site 5 or 6 times, and there's astronomical alignments. In fact, I've got some new research, some new observations at the site that are up on my website, alignment2012.com. And people can go there and see the astronomical alignments there and how it relates to the galactic alignment in 2012.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Well, John, that was a lot of information. I think the audience is still digesting some of it, but I still have one more question for you. On the topic of the Mayan civilization, were they a warring people?
Well, sure. They, like any high civilization, they will engage in all the, human spectrum of behavior. So they did have wars on other kingdoms and so on.
Well, what I want to get to is I want to get a brief rundown of the cycles that we know the Mayans may or possibly, to what information we have gone through. I noticed that archaeological remains kind of show that there were some burial pits, and there are some different perspectives on human sacrifice. and I'm curious what theirs were, what your research has shown you, and I'm also curious about some of the claims that I've heard from National Geographic about climate change taking place during the suspected fall or collapse of the Mayan civilization.
Well, all those things took place towards the end of the classic Maya civilization in like the 8th and 9th century AD. There was climate change. It could have been brought about by way of a degradation of the environment through over harvesting of resources. There did seem to be a period of a drought, and I think that at an end of a civilization, there's kind of like a spiritual degradation that happens in a culture. There's just kind of a debasement that happens, and I think to some degree our own Western civilization is experiencing some of this, and also greed. In the Maya downfall in the 9th century, greed seems to have been taking place, where you had this proliferation of princedoms, and they were all trying to get their piece of the pie, and it just sucked the marrow out of the whole thing.
What exactly did the sacrifice represent at that time?
Well, in the later phases, sacrifice is simply, revenge, or, one can imagine the most barbaric kind of form of that. What I try to do is peel back the layers and get back to the original spiritual teaching that is behind sacrifice. Like in the creation mythology, this whole problem of ego controlling the world at the end of the cycle. Sacrifice is important for effecting a positive transformation, because we need to sacrifice the illusions that keep us fixated to ego. And this is more of a spiritual kind of sacrifice in which we put ego back into right relationship with the right, the true wisdom.
So there may have been a misinterpretation of that as they became closer and closer to the end of their cycle.
Yeah, misinterpretation and degradation of the understanding of it.
Well, I'm glad you can clarify that for me. That's been something that I've been wondering about, and I think that a lot of people that watch the film Apocalypto probably overlooked the long count Mayan calendar and probably some of the beauties they left prior to some of the things that transpired towards the end.
Yeah, Apocalypto kind of did a disservice in that regard, but a great film by Aronofsky called The Fountain handled some really amazing, what I would consider Mayan teachings around death and sacrifice and immortality.
So with the time that I have with you remaining, the last question is probably going to be about, of course, spirituality, what people do now, how people are handling this information, or what exactly they do with this information about 2012. Granted that we're in a time, as you see as well, of monumental change. We know that change is a big reality now, change in government, change in our relationship to law enforcement, change in relationship to nature. And what we want to see is a positive change come out of all this darkness that certain individuals are trying to create and bring to a climax. Perhaps it is the end of this cycle. I think it is pointing, I think all roads are pointing in that direction. So at this time that we have left, what do we do now? How do we view this new reality that we may begin to experience in, 5 years now?
Yeah, coming up to 5 years. Well, I think that as you're really on it with law enforcement and changes and sort of a clamping down of the iron heel. This is a problem for all free-thinking people everywhere, and I guess my speculation is that we have to have some kind of engaged political social activism going on. But I guess I would say that can be most effective if we also at the same time have a sort of a spiritual practice going on in our own inner. In other words, that we're doing the centering work. We're doing the work on ourselves spiritually to remain balanced. And part of that, I think, is to refuse to be snowed by the fear-mongers and the controllers and the deceivers. So we really have to work hard to keep our BS meters operating, to be able to discern the wheat from the chaff, and then at the same time to be practicing a spiritual centering. I think meditation is really a good thing. To practice even 15 minutes of meditation in the morning can really, if you keep it up over weeks and weeks and weeks, it can really transform one's effectiveness in your worldly pursuits. So in the domain of political activism, then it can be that much more effective.
Well, that's an interesting point. When I look at this rise in interest in like Tai Chi, yoga, Qigong, things of that nature, I don't think I'm just seeing a fad. I think I'm seeing this organic awareness of people's the energy that is within us all. This field that every day now it seems science is starting to prove more and more instead of disprove. So I find that to be very interesting to just kind of see this manifest in the physical reality while all these other things are transpiring.
Yes, you're right, Alex. People are getting into these traditional methods in a way that I don't think we have before. In a similar way, there's a sustainable living movement that's going on. Right use of resources and biofuel technology, and it's not just like hippies getting back to nature or something. I really am heartened by this amazing movement. To a large degree among young people, in which I think we are going to be able to create a sustainable, livable, community-based future, but it does require a radical 180-degree shift and sort of calling into question a lot of the fundamental assumptions of Western civilization.
John, I'm very pleased you were able to make it on the broadcast. Thank you so very much.
It's been nice to be here, Alex.
All right. Good night, John.